You're listening to the Very Refreshing Podcast with Dylan Hamar and Alek Jetzel. It's delicious. It's very refreshing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Refreshing Podcast. This is episode 4. My name is Alek Jetzel.
I'm Dylan Hamar.
I'm Dylan Hamar.
Hey, what's up? You're listening to Alek Jetzel and Dylan Hamar on KTVB News.
That was my first go at starting us, and I don't think it could have gone any better. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, the tool was light, but the responsibility was heavy. So far, episode 1 and 2, we talked about us making films. Mm-hmm. Last episode, we talked about our love of Seinfeld, and I'm really excited about this one. Alek actually recommended that we go into episode 4 on this topic, and that topic is video games. Video games. It's the biggest entertainment medium in the world. It sells more than movies. It sells more than books. It sells more than porn. Video games make more than porn. So it is...
Can you believe that, everybody?
Hey, can you believe that video games sell more than porn? the freaking hockey air horn.
At some point, we'll have a soundboard where you can just go... like the beginning of a Drake song.
Yeah. And then we have Kramer. It's very refreshing.
Yeah,
you know.
Totally.
But yeah, it is the biggest entertainment medium in the world. Us being kids that were born in the 1990s, and even going back further, people like my brother. My brother's 10 years older than me. My brother was born in 1981. His early childhood. You get into the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then I was born the year the Super Nintendo came out. So we've grown up with the evolution of video games. There are kids nowadays that are in, late elementary, junior high, and all they've known is the current or previous gen gaming, the next gen. When I say next gen, I'm mainly referring to that as a blanket statement, referring to, the 3D Unreal Engine games that have online bases, PvP, all those things, competitive gaming, for example, the Fortnites, the Rocket Leagues, the Call of Duties, whatever. Mm-hmm. So just like you started us off with the intro, why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in terms of video games? Where did you get started, and how did video games catch your eye?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned, we mentioned this in the last podcast, me and Dylan come from very different backgrounds. So it's kind of a cool thing that we're still as good of buddies because we have such different upbringings. This applies to video games as well. Definitely applies to video games. So I grew up in a household, and my dad was pretty anti-video game most of my childhood. My dad is, in his prime, one of the best athletes I've ever known. He's got a jump shot that is crazy, all this stuff, right? So he comes from that generation of, my kids are going to go outside and learn things and be athletes or whatever. They're not going to sit inside and get pale playing video games. He was very anti that, right? So that up until we moved out to a place, I'm from Texas, my family's from Texas. We moved from the suburbs out to this plot of land that had 5 acres, and it was in a town called Red Oak, Texas. And our nearest neighbor was like a mile away. We had all this land. And it took some convincing, but at a certain point, my mom convinced Dad that we're allowed to have video games because we're just bored, right?
Well, and having friends was probably really difficult.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The friends, we only made friends at church and at school, right? Our neighbors weren't really our friends. So that, that was harder that way. So I remember, I wish I knew exactly what year it was, but it was Christmas morning. We come into the living room, we're opening things up, and my mom was always very theatric with our gifts. I don't know if your mom was this way too. She would do like the low level gifts and build the excitement, and then there was always like one big gift left for the finale.
Oh yeah, there were stages, 100%. Yeah,
probably most moms do that, right?
Yeah, it's exciting.
You spend months buying gifts. You want there to be a finale, right? So we get to the finale gift, and me and my brother Zach, who's 2 years younger than me, we both see it, right? And we pull it out and we open it up, and there's a GameCube inside of there. And my mom had been secretly working on my dad. We didn't know that she was convincing him. So we open this GameCube and we literally are shocked. We look up, we look at my dad and we go, is this allowed? Like, are we allowed to have this? There must be some mistake, right? So
Is this a trick?
Yeah, this is a trick. So my very first platform ever was the GameCube. And I remember we got 3 games. We got Super Mario Sunshine, we got SSX Tricky, and Scooby-Doo Night of a Thousand Frights. Those were our 3 video games. And so we fired it up and we were playing It's Tricky to Rock Around within like 20 minutes. And we played all day long, right? And that was our first video game platform. And that was like my introduction into video games, really. Up until then, I had been over to buddies' houses and they had the N64 and the GameCube. But so I'd only played video games externally outside of our own home. That was our first in-home platform.
Did that, when you would go to friends' houses and you would see their consoles or whatever, did you at a young age, even before the GameCube, have a super strong connection to video games? Or was it just like you saw it and you're like, oh, that's just another thing in the world, like whatever?
No, it was my dad talked so strongly about anti-video games that I think in my kid mind, I had been like, oh, we're just never going to have video games and that's okay. It's one of those things we get to do when we go to a friend's house. So it's like a treat when we go somewhere else, but it's not going to be in our household, right? I'd like convince myself of that, right? And as a kid, you would always like make friends with the kid who had the coolest stuff. You know what I mean? Like we were kind of selfish as little kids. You were like, I want to be friends with Johnny because he's got the cool stuff. Not even because I like Johnny. I just want to be his friend for his stuff. So it's kind of like that, right? We'd go over to I remember it was the Swahlbergs and it was the Swahlbergs. They were the kids. And
were they Jewish?
No. No, they were the Swahlbergs and they were cool kids though. We weren't just using them for their N64, but it was funny because we were 4 boys, right? It was me, my brother, and then my other 2 brothers. 4 boys. The Swahlbergs were also 4 boys. So it was like the perfect connection where we could go over.
Did your guys' ages kind of line up too?
Yeah, so their oldest was, I'm the oldest, but their oldest was just a year older than me. And then they had a brother that was my age. So it like lined up pretty good, right? And they were, N64 playing Pokemon on their Game Boys. And now that I realize it, I probably should mention I did have a Game Boy before that. But my first home console that was up on the big TV was the GameCube. But yeah, so I didn't have like a connection. Like I said, I'd almost convinced myself we're just not going to have games in the house. And that's okay. In a perfect world, maybe we would, but not right now.
Yeah. Cool. So with your Game Boy, what age did you get your Game Boy? I know you played Batman Forever.
Yeah,
on your Game Boy. We talked about that.
That was one of those ones I remember having. I remember having Super Mario, the Game Boy non-color.
Oh, Super Mario Land.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Super Mario, Batman. And then my grandpa, he would like sneak us stuff, and he's like, this isn't a big investment anyway, so he would sneak us, and he got us upgraded on the Game Boy Color. And at that point, I don't even remember the games that we got, but I do remember A Bug's Life. I remember getting that Game Boy game, and it was at the time where like these studios were pumping out these like video games that weren't any good just to sell them to kids, and Bug's Life was broken, and you like couldn't get past the first level.
Yeah, and with Batman Forever, I don't think you were able to get past the first level either, right?
No. And, having not had video games up to that point, my whole mentality, and I used to do this with Super Mario Sunshine all the time, I would play until it got a little too hard, and then I would erase and start over. I did that for years with the GameCube. If I thought it was too hard, I'd be like, nah, yeah, but I like the beginning, and I would just erase and start over. I don't think I completed a game cover to cover until much, much later. It was crazy. Yeah,
I heard an interesting statistic lately. It was like, oh man, I'm trying to remember the actual number, but it's something like 25% of people actually finish the games they buy.
25.
It's so low.
That's weird.
Yeah, like most people don't beat the games they buy. It's wild.
I wonder if you broke that statistic down even further, is it like maybe it's because there are so many kid gamers and they had the same mentality that I did? Because on Super Mario Sunshine, I look back and I'm like, oh, that was actually a pretty hard game, right? So you'd get to a platform that was just wild, right? You'd see spinning freaking blocks and stuff, and you're like, nope, I'm out. And then you would just start over and go back to the beginning. I wonder if that's part of it too. Like maybe kid gamers getting to a certain point and then, nah.
Well, and it's interesting you say that with full games because a lot of people from our generation, growing up, demo discs were a very big thing.
Uh-huh.
You'd buy things like Game Informer or Electronic Gaming Monthly, and sometimes they would come with a demo disc, right? Basically, it would just showcase what new games were coming out. You might get one for PS1. PlayStation had like PlayStation Jump, I believe it was called, or PlayStation Underground rather. And you would get these like little demo discs and they would have trailers and things like that. And I own a ton of them. Right. But yeah, you could play like the first stage of like Spyro the Dragon for PS1, or, the first level of Crash Bandicoot, or maybe there's like a timed portion of Metal Gear Solid or whatever the case is. But rather than buy the games, a lot of kids would just play those demos over and over and over and over. And that's almost like a nostalgia factor in itself for a lot of people. They're like, because
kids would go to the store and be like, do I want to get one game or do I get the demo disc that has 6, 7, 8 games on it? Just the one portion. And as a kid, you're always like, yo, more is better.
Yeah, and it was nice, though, because, this was before... the internet has been around technically since, like, the late 70s. But if we get into the World Wide Web, when you're in the 90s, you're not going online to figure out what games you want to buy. You had to rely on magazines.
Yeah.
So a lot of these magazines would come with a demo disc. So whether that be you go to a bookstore and pick up a magazine, or maybe you're a member of a subscription of said magazine, whatever the case is, you got these demo discs of like PlayStation Underground, for example. Xbox had their own. There were lots of, and it was crazy because this was not something that really existed in the cartridge era.
Yeah.
Making cartridges with demos would have been so expensive, but if you want to, look what America Online did. They printed millions and they pressed millions and millions and millions of discs that had, AOL subscription trials on them, and they just like would shove them in your mailbox. There were people that like, I have like 2,000 hours left of AOL.
Yeah.
Discs, it just made sense. It was a genius marketing strategy, but a lot like how you were playing these like first levels or maybe up to a certain point, a lot of kids would play demos and then, restart them and restart them and restart them over and over. And that in itself is a lot of, it brings people like fond memories in that way, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I don't know if we ever really got that many demo discs, but I do remember that, which is something that really doesn't exist anymore. Like game demos itself are not super popular anymore either. I know you can get them on like the PlayStation Store. They'll give you like, half an hour of a game, but I don't think I've ever taken advantage of a game demo. I know you have because there's some pretty anticipated games that you've been into. But yeah, game demos are almost kind of moving out anyway.
Dude, I have a Japanese user on my PlayStation just so I can play like Resident Evil demos early. Like rather than just wait a day for it to drop just because of the time difference, I'm just like, no, I'm gonna play the Resident Evil 4 demo early or something like that. You know,
it picks up where you left off, right?
Some games it will, but not in that case.
Gotcha.
No.
Gotcha.
So, with me personally,
yeah, I was gonna say, tell me about your first console and what that was about.
Well, so growing up, between like, 3 and 5 or whatever, my brother had, we had like NES, Sega Genesis, and stuff like that. But it was more like I was so invested in what my brother liked, whether that was wrestling or anything like that. And video games were one of those things. But what really drove a nail into my dedication was in 1996. You
were born in what year? So how old
1991. So I was 5 years old. For Christmas of 96, I couldn't sleep. And this was a Christmas Eve, not being able to sleep through the night. Every kid was plagued by that. Christmas morning was so exciting.
Totally.
And it's just like you would lay in bed. And my mom and my dad were sitting in the living room, and it's beautiful. It's like the living room was illuminated by the Christmas tree, but there were no house lights on. They were just sitting on the couch, sharing company with each other and just looking at the tree. And I walk in and I'm like, I can't sleep, and my dad had just bought an RV and it was in the driveway, and my dad and I went out to his RV to have a boys' night. And we laid kind of like on the bed of his RV, inside the RV, and he was doing this thing where he would trace letters into my back with his finger, and I had to guess what the letters were, and we did that until I fell asleep. He like helped me fall asleep. What, like, the most fond memory I have of my dad. Funny though, that was also the year I found out there was no Santa Claus.
Oh.
Because I glanced out the window of the RV and I saw Mom carrying in the gifts.
Oh no.
And I was like,
things aren't adding up here.
I was like, what's happening? Like, does Mom work for Santa?
Did your dad, just have to ask, did your dad do that classic dad joke where he would draw a bee on you? And then you go, it's a bee. And he'd go, kill it. And he'd smack your back.
No.
My dad did that all the time.
God, that's hilarious. But that year, Christmas morning, I got a new bicycle.
Dude, we're talking about video games in this episode, but can we talk about how incredible it was to get a new bike on
Nothing
Christmas
like
morning?
it.
There was nothing like it.
It was the coolest. Yeah.
Getting a new bike.
It's a nice bike, boy. What's that, a Huffy?
And especially in like the late 90s, early 2000s, all of the bikes that you could get at like Walmart or wherever always had like these really like edgy designs painted
Like Mongoose.
Yeah. Or it would be like red, but then there was a rocket on there. Or it'd be like blue and there was electric strikes on it.
Yeah.
Bikes were really putting in the work on making them cool.
Yeah, it made you want to take them off some jumps.
Oh, yeah, dude.
But, so I got my bike, and that wasn't wrapped, of course. There was just a bike chilling. I knew it was for me. But much like, the grand finale, I opened up this big box, and it was a Super Nintendo. And you have to understand, 1996, I believe, was the year the PlayStation came out.
Okay.
So we were behind a generation, but I got a Super Nintendo, and I didn't just get a Super Nintendo. I got the Donkey Kong Country combo. So it came with Donkey Kong Country. And not only did I get Donkey Kong Country, my parents got me Super Mario World with it.
Ooh.
Which are two of the greatest platformers ever made, ever. Donkey Kong Country to this day is still in my top 5. We'll get into that later. Mm-hmm. But that just solidified everything for me. I was obsessed. I played the Super Nintendo constantly. We're talking Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country. We're talking The Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past. We're talking Chrono Trigger. We're talking Final Fantasy 3. We're talking just Secret of Mana. There's just so many games on that console. You have Star Fox. You have Kirby's Adventure. You have like all of these games. And it's just, to me, the Super Nintendo is like upper echelon, not just because of the games. You know, obviously we've surpassed that 16-bit generation, but it had the iconic dog bone controller that was so comfortable to hold. It just introduced so much, and it was so great. And there's always that argument, what's better, the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo? To me, there's no freaking contest. And I'm probably going to offend Sega Genesis owners out there. It usually like coincides with what you grew up with. However, I think Super Nintendo had the better controller. Super Nintendo had the better platformers. Like, I'm sorry, but has anyone gone back and played Sonic 1 through 3? They're super difficult to control.
You've only played them if you're like me, and there was that GameCube disc that had like 9 of the original Sonic
like the
games.
Sonic Legacy Collection.
Yeah. And then you played the first 3, and you're like, these are too hard, and you ended up just playing Sonic Pinball the entire time on that disc.
Oh, Sonic Spinball.
Yeah.
But what else is interesting though was another thing happened that year. So in the 90s, you used to be able to rent video game consoles, whether it be from Hollywood or Blockbuster. You know, there's like Movie Gallery. There was a bunch of places.
There was always like a local one that wasn't associated.
Yeah, there was like a mom and pop, and then there were,
like Video Verns or something.
Video memories. But then there was like the Globo gyms, like the Blockbuster Video.
Totally.
Which that in itself is like a whole other topic. But
yeah.
My brother rented a Sony PlayStation, and he brought it home.
How old was you? You said your brother was 10 years older than you. So
my brother at that time would have been 15.
Okay.
Right. So 96. He was born in 81.
Okay.
Brought home a Sony PlayStation. And there were a couple of games that he had, but he had like I believe he brought home, I believe it was like the first Ridge Racer game. There was, I'm trying to remember what the second one was, but he had this game with him called Resident Evil, and put it in, and I watched him play it, and it blew my freaking mind. As a child, my parents got me into horror films. We're going to have a whole separate topic, or an episode rather, of just that. Mm-hmm. Seeing Resident Evil for the first time, there was nothing like it. It was the most mind-blowing thing. My brother's friend Kent had a Nintendo 64 when those eventually came out. So like Super Mario World, there was all these 3D platformers that were changing the game. But in 1996, to see a horror game on that scale, because you have to understand, Nintendo was very kid-friendly.
Yeah.
Right?
Which, looking back, that's totally why we got a GameCube first, right?
Yeah.
It was like the cheapest, and it was like the most... I'm sure my mom did a bunch of research on it.
Well, yeah, and that's funny as well, because later on, Capcom had a deal exclusively with Nintendo for like the Resident Evil remake, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 4 was like originally launched on the GameCube, but Nintendo was very kid-friendly, especially in the NES and SNES eras. The Genesis did have some edge. You had games like Golden Axe and Altered Beast and things like that. But, I mean, even when Mortal Kombat 1 launched on the Super Nintendo, they cut the blood out, right?
Yeah.
So when I grew up with Mario, Donkey Kong, Link, Kirby, like all of these
cute guys. Very
cutesy, right?
Yeah.
But to see an introduction to a video game where a man gets mauled by a zombie dog, the cast ends up in the Spencer Mansion, and what campaign you're on, like if you're Jill, Chris is missing. It's just like, and there is the house is just infested with monsters. It was so groundbreaking. And I remember seeing that game and being like, oh,
this is it.
This is where we're going.
Yeah.
This is where we're going. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, of course, 1998 Resident Evil 2 came out, 99 Resident Evil 3. And we'll get into our favorite game franchises here shortly. But the Super Nintendo and the Sony PlayStation, I mean, again, those were the ones that really just pulled me in full force. Right. So going back to what you said, I mean, like, you had SSX Tricky. We had a conversation recently about games that we're nostalgic about.
Yeah.
And what I find really funny is that the games you're nostalgic about are almost like games that the press did not appreciate. Like, what was it, Shrek 2?
Yeah, so that was the other thing. Having come from like a household that wasn't on the cutting edge of video games, what are the ones that we typically get? They were the movie tie-ins, right? So we'd get the Shrek game. We obviously got the Spider-Man games, right? That were attached to the... Like, I remember playing Spider-Man 1, right? And then a couple years later getting Spider-Man 2, which is the ultimate nostalgia game. Like, Spider-Man 2 on GameCube was something else. But yeah, you're right. We would get these movie tie-in games, and it's almost like we didn't know any better. So Shrek 2 on GameCube was like top tier. We're like, this is this is awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Right? You get to play as all the characters. They all have their different fighting style,
Was Shrek
cool.
2, was it like a tournament fighter? What was it?
No, I think Shrek 1 was almost like a Mario Party, right? Shrek 2 did follow the story of the movie.
Okay, so it was like a 3D platformer game?
Yeah. Got it. It was like a platformer beat 'em up kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like, you'd run through the level, and obviously, like most movie tie-in games, they go off on these different paths, and that weren't in the movie. So it was almost
kind of like the Incredibles game.
Yeah. You were like experiencing parts that weren't in the movie, and you were like, "Oh man, this is bigger than the movie.
This is Shrek lore."
Yeah, right. You're like, "Oh my gosh, Humpty Dumpty didn't show up in the movie, but he's in the game," or what. I don't remember if that's exactly, but you know what I mean. You're like, "This is exclusive stuff," right? And then you'd have like, you'd have Shrek and Donkey. But then later on, when Shrek drinks the potion and turns handsome, they become one character. It's like him on the horse with like a sword. It was awesome, dude. As a kid, I was like, this is cool, man. So, but you're right. Like we we would play these games that nobody else was playing, right? Because those are the games that we would get because we were like not rooted in video games. That was the stuff that we thought was the most important. It's like, yo, you go watch the movie and then you play the game. That's the real experience.
Well, and that's what I love to hear about, because the difference between you and I mainly was the fact that I was so deep rooted in video games. You know, I was getting on fights on the school bus, like, no, the Super Nintendo's better. No, then Sega does what Nintendo don't. You know, like those types of things. But you were sort of like, you are, even today, you are the definition of casual.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? You are a person that loves video games, but to you, it's just another one of the hobbies, right?
Yeah.
And even growing up.
Well, yeah, I had a foot in both camps for sure, right?
Okay.
Because right before we opened, I'm remembering this now. I forgot about this. Right before we opened the GameCube, we opened this backyard tennis set, right? It was like a net, these giant rackets, and then
Was that called like badminton or something?
No, it wasn't badminton. It was like actual tennis, right? But it was with like this rubber blow up ball that could bounce on the ground. Not like a tennis ball, right? So you could have a tennis court in your backyard, right? That was from Dad. The GameCube was from Mom, right? And so we had very specific rules about the timeage that we could spend on the GameCube, right? It's like, if you want an hour on the GameCube, you got to spend an hour outside, right? That was the compromise that my parents got to, right? So I grew up having a foot in both camps, right? I could never be like a true gamer, right? Even if I wanted to be, because I had this other thing, you know? And I ended up liking it that way, right? I learned some stuff from both
that
stuff.
sort of reflects you today too.
I think you're right, yeah.
Because
like
not only do you play video games, but you're very big into fitness and all those other things. You play basketball multiple times a week. Anytime there was a football league, you played football.
Yeah.
You're very well balanced between.
Yeah, I like collect hobbies. Like, that's one of the biggest things I collect, is I do a bunch of different stuff, you know? And video games is like, I don't go sit down on the couch to play video games until the very end of the day after I've done a bunch of other stuff. You know what I mean?
I even know, sorry, his wife is sitting in here, but she has to know this. I know that you even spend time with your wife till she like cannot take it and has to go to bed.
Yeah.
And then that's usually when you'll indulge on video games, you know, like you're very balanced.
She has a much more defined sleep schedule than I do. And so she'll get in bed a little bit earlier, and that's when I'll usually plug in. But depending on if I have a game to play, right? If I have a new game that I'm like kind of jazzed on, I'll play it while she's awake. So hopefully she'll forgive me for that. You know, she just gave me a thumbs up. We're good to go.
His wife is awesome. Awesome. Now, so video games were very...
Yeah, and so sorry to bring it back. But like you said... Even up until recently, I was way more casual, right? We had a GameCube, and then I didn't get a PlayStation 2 until maybe like a decade later, right? And that's probably where things really like, and I say really took off, even though I'm still casual. The PlayStation 2 was a game changer.
It's the highest selling console in history.
Getting a PlayStation 2 was a game changer. And it was a game changer because I had a buddy down the road, right? At this point, we had moved to Idaho. I had a buddy down the road who also had a PlayStation, so I could swap games, right? We could trade, and which is something that doesn't exist anymore either. Swapping games with you, maybe it does for younger people, but like swapping games with your buddies, right? So,
I mean, my room is a video store. Caleb comes in and rents games anytime he wants, you know?
Yeah. But yeah, so he got me into other stuff, right? So I played like my first Need for Speed game with him, right? Burnout. He lent me Kingdom Hearts, right? Which is something that we can talk about in a minute. That was a game changer, right? Yeah, and then we were always like a generation behind, right? I didn't get a PlayStation 3 until the PlayStation 4 was coming out, right? And me and my brother Zach, who's 2 years younger than me, we did that so that we could get games cheap, right? We'd wait until PlayStation 4 was almost coming out. We'd go get the PlayStation 3, and at that point, we could go get Uncharted and Infamous and Batman, Arkham, all these cool games that we had seen in Game Informer for like $10 a pop. And that's how we did it for a long time. So we were never, ever on the cutting edge of it, which is, you know.
That's smart.
Yeah. Well, it was good for us, right? But it's the opposite of what you were going for. You were always on the cutting edge.
I'm always trying. So I'm a video game collector, right? Alek is one of the very few people that I've let into my domain that I'm the master of. I'm the master of my domain. But you know this. I have pretty much like every major console ever.
Yeah.
I have a huge video game collection. I think my PlayStation 4 and 5 collection alone is sitting at like a few hundred. It's nuts, right? So I'm always trying. I'm very big into collecting, and we have we're going to be talking about that in a future episode. But yeah, I've always been what's new, what's hot, and you know, I don't know, man. Like again, it went for me PS1. I as soon as PlayStation came out,
You swore your allegiance.
I never thought that I would abandon Nintendo. And I've casually visited Nintendo over the years, right? I mean, the reality of it is that so many people are nostalgic for the Nintendo 64. Even though that's from my generation, I don't really have nostalgia for the Nintendo 64. I acknowledge the fact that Super Mario 64 was a groundbreaking title because it was a launch title with the Nintendo 64. It was a 3D game unlike anything we had ever seen. 3D was very much in its infancy. It was on crutches, trying to figure out how to walk. Super Mario 64 blasted off, right? But then you also had like Banjo-Kazooie. You had Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. And my problem with that was, and it still is, hot take, those games play the same. They play very similar. It's like they're all running on the same engine. If you get a 3D platformer for Nintendo 64, they're very, very similar. Whether it be Donkey Kong 64, Banjo-Tooie, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And it was weird because when I got to PlayStation, I mean, think about this. I mentioned Resident Evil earlier. PlayStation had Resident Evil. PlayStation had Tekken. PlayStation had Ridge Racer. PlayStation had Sony stole Final Fantasy from Nintendo, you know, because Final Fantasy was a Nintendo title, right? You had the NES games, and then from that point on, we had the Super Nintendo, like Final Fantasy 3. But Final Fantasy 7 came to the Sony PlayStation. So we had Final Fantasy, we had Silent Hill, we had Crash, we had Spyro. A lot of people think that Tomb Raider was an exclusive title to PlayStation. It wasn't. Even though it's very, you know, in that realm. You know, you had the Tomb Raider games. And it was just incredible. It was so cool. There were so many games on the PlayStation. You know, a lot of people talk about PlayStation 2, which we'll get to in a second, because you have a lot to say about PS2.
Definitely.
PS1 was equally important to me because I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it. To me, personally, Resident Evil 2 is the greatest game ever made. That's my number one.
So, let me ask you.
You're going to ask the remake or the original?
Remake or original?
So, they're actually, I think, tied.
Okay.
I love them for different reasons. Resident Evil 2 was... I can't explain it. You know, like, I remember the first time I played that game. It was in 1998. I sat down and I had this intro cutscene introducing us to these two characters. We're actually in Raccoon City. You start off and Leon needs to make it to the RPD, or if you're playing as Claire, you have to get to the RPD. It was so immersive. It was so scary, grim, dark. Music was top notch. The storyline was top notch. And this was a PlayStation game. You have to think, the PlayStation was a 32-bit console. It wasn't even as powerful as the Nintendo 64. It was weaker. Yeah. In terms of its bit capability, right? But those CD games had the best music. You could fit more data. Nintendo 64 cartridges, while it was a more powerful console, you couldn't store as much data on a Nintendo 64 cartridge as you could with a Sony PlayStation disc, right? These CD based formats. But it blew my mind, dude. And I know we're going to get into the PS2. The PS2 to this day is, like I said before, the highest selling video game console in history. It's sitting at, I believe, around 180 million.
Units?
Yes.
Dang.
I think it's 180. I
Okay.
might be wrong. It's close to 200 million.
Okay.
Large in part because of the DVD player. Now, when the PlayStation 2 launched, DVD format was like, again, kind of in its infancy, but it was rolling along.
Yeah.
DVD players on their own were very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So not only did PlayStation 2 continue the trend of Sony having these really great games, but you had a DVD player right out of the box.
Game changer.
Right? So what was your experience with the PS2? We've talked about the NES a little bit, which, again, the original Nintendo Entertainment System was groundbreaking on its own. It's basically revived the video game console because there was the video game crash. The Atari went away. The NES revived video games. Then we got to the Sega Genesis, the TurboGrafx 16, the Super Nintendo. Then we went into Sony PlayStation N64. And then when we're getting into 1999, 2000, 2001, we get into the DVD era.
Mm-hmm.
The PS2 comes out. Even though you got it a little bit later,
Yeah.
what was your experience with the PS2?
So it's interesting that you say that because like I mentioned, we got it later.
You said it was like 10 years later?
I don't know how long it was. I don't know the exact year, but I'll tell a story and anybody who wants to look it up can know the exact time. So by the time we got a PlayStation 2, we had already had DVD players for a minute, right? So I don't think I ever watched a DVD on my PlayStation 2.
The original PS2 came out in March of 2000.
Okay.
So
it was much later, right? We had already had DVDs for a minute. Now, this is going to tell you exactly what time it was. And this is also the most casual video game thing ever. We didn't even want a PlayStation 2 until Rock Band came out. My buddy, the buddy down the street, he had a PlayStation 2 and we would play Guitar Hero, right? On his PlayStation 2. Which I think if you're Guitar Hero 2 on PlayStation 2 is like still the best one.
I go out on some people would say Guitar Hero 3.
Uh-huh.
I think Guitar Hero 2 is the best.
It's pretty good.
Very good.
So that's the one we were playing and we went, "Oh man, Rock Band is coming out." And it was one of those things where like, "Oh, it's only going to be available on the PlayStation 3 and the Wii, right? Which is coming out later, but they announced that there was going to be like a very, very, very scaled down version of Rock Band for the PlayStation 2. So we went, what's the cheapest way we can get a hold of Rock Band? Well, it's to get a PlayStation 2. And the PlayStation 2 had been out for a minute, right? So we didn't even get like the new slim version. We got the old brick,
the fat
one, right? Because that was the cheapest way we could get to be able to play Rock Band, right? And it wasn't until we got Rock Band, that then my buddy started lending me other games like Kingdom Hearts, I actually played Kingdom Hearts 2 first and then went back and played Kingdom Hearts 1, which is kind of tough, but Kingdom Hearts 2 still holds like a very, very special place in my heart thanks to the PlayStation 2. So yeah, I had a very different like experience with the PlayStation 2 because I know, like you said, highest selling console. And it's because parents could go out and say, "Let me buy a DVD player." Oh, wait, for the same price, I can also get a PlayStation.
In some cases, cheaper.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
I mean, you could get a DVD player for $400, or you could get a PS2 at launch, I think, for like $299.
Yeah, crazy.
No brainer.
Yeah, right. And so, yeah, you had all these parents buying PlayStations, being like, "Okay, well then, we'll get the DVD player now, and then at Christmas I'll get them a couple games probably, and then we can just play it. We can do it together," which is crazy, man. That innovation is crazy. But yeah, I don't think I remember ever watching a DVD on the PlayStation. Crazy enough, because we got it so late.
Right. So you said Rock Band.
Uh-huh.
Rock Band launched in 2007.
Okay.
So that would have been 7 years. And you got to think, I think in 2006 was when the 360 came out.
Yeah.
So
they were just about to launch like the new generation, if not already.
Yeah. So I think I might be wrong on my dates. Don't crucify me for this. But I think in 2006, the 360 came out. And I think in 2007, the PS3 came out. Okay. So the 360 was a year before.
Okay.
360 beat PlayStation to the market. But yeah, so you had you got Rock Band for PS2, which was the scaled back version.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the Nintendo Wii version, by the way. Because Nintendo Wii was not next gen. Nintendo Wii was just about as powerful as the PS2 was anyway.
Okay.
And in some cases weaker.
Yeah. It just had the motion controls, which was like huge.
Yeah.
Because we did get a Wii not too long after that. And it was one of those convincing your parents, look, we can exercise while playing video games, you know, because I'm swinging a bat and swinging the racket, you know, and parents are like, okay, I guess maybe.
I don't have much to say about the Wii. The Wii had some really great games. It had a lot of shovelware. Pro tip for anyone listening, right now, okay, in May of 2023, the GameCube is a hot commodity. It is so collectible. Games are very expensive, and GameCubes themselves are really expensive. Pro tip, get yourself a first generation Nintendo Wii.
That was a game changer because it had, you could plug your controllers into the top, right? It had a slot for the memory card.
And you could play GameCube.
It was backwards compatible.
They did remove that feature on later iterations of the Wii, but the original Wiis were backwards compatible with GameCube.
That also made it awesome for when Smash Brothers Brawl came out, right? The Wii Smash Brothers.
So you could play with the GameCube.
You could play with the GameCube controller, which is
still how people
still
play.
to this day. I think the ultimate way to play Smash Brothers.
Well, people play Ultimate
with
GameCube controllers. It's the way to go.
This is the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kingdom Hearts. Now, PS2, just like the PS1, had some iconic titles. I mean, we have, it goes on for miles, right? You had games like the GTA series, starting with Grand Theft Auto 3, really got going on the PS2. Those eventually got ported over to the Xbox with the trilogy. But it's like you had GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas. But then like games like Devil May Cry got their start. God of War got their start on PS2. Shadow of the Colossus. Final Fantasy X. Like Max Payne. It just goes on and on and on. But we're talking... I want to have a conversation with you about Kingdom Hearts because you and I are both massive Kingdom Hearts fans. In particular... You said that Kingdom Hearts 2 holds a special place in your heart. Again, I'm speaking in absolutes. I'm going to throw it into the wind. Kingdom Hearts is one of the greatest games of all time. Period.
Franchises or two?
Two.
Oh, yeah. Kingdom Hearts 2.
Yeah.
If I'm making a top 5 list, it's there.
Kingdom Hearts 2 would absolutely make a top 5. It is perfect.
Yeah.
It's a perfect game.
And it's a perfect game that has gotten like remasters on the PS3 and then on the PS4, and it somehow gets better every time. Sure. They're adding like additional content and boss fights to it every single time. It's crazy. Yeah. Kingdom Hearts is so silly. Not silly. It's really interesting too, because my buddy who lent it to me, he goes, you play this kid and he has a Keyblade, right? And I'm like, Keyblade already sounds cool. You're like, oh man, it's a sword that is like shaped like a key. I'm in. That's already sounds cool. And then he goes, and you get to interact with your favorite Disney characters. And part of me trying to be the little macho kid that I was like,
Disney's for
lame.
babies.
Yeah, I was like, that's lame. I was like, you had me at Keyblade and you lost me at Donald Duck. Like, what's going on here, you know?
Donald Duck, literally the worst healer.
Yeah.
The worst support character.
You have to go in and set him to a specific setting to get him to heal you, right?
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, he's like, no, dude, trust me. You got to try it, right? And he was like, here, play Kingdom Hearts 2, right? Don't play 1, play 2, right? So I played 2, and anybody who knows what we're talking about, it just is, it's gripping, man. It just gets you, and it's good, and there's this incredible story, and this incredible world building, and the gameplay is awesome, and everything was awesome in Kingdom Hearts 2.
And it was so improved over the first one.
Yep.
The camera was better. The gummy ship battles were great. The customization, the worlds were great. Mm-hmm. I was actually on the opposite side of the Kingdom Hearts hype, rather. I had a friend who was pitching the first game to me and had just come out, and he goes, dude, you have to play this game, Kingdom Hearts. And I'm like, what is Kingdom Hearts? And he goes, well, it's Final Fantasy. And I was a huge Final Fantasy fan.
Yeah.
I still am. He's like, it's Final Fantasy and Disney combined. And I'm like, That sounds stupid.
Yeah.
That sounds so dumb, right? Because the thing is like, I mean, Disney games are fun and all, but that was the PS2. I was like a teenager. I'm edgy, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to play, like, Final Fantasy was cool. It was deep. It's whatever. And I was like, how could Disney possibly go deep? It's going to be a kid's game. And I played the first one, blew me away. And then I played the second one when it came out. I got it on launch day. And I remember playing the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2. I was playing as Roxas. And it went on for a while.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden, Kingdom Hearts 2's title comes up. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I was like, where's Sora?
Yeah.
And it was just like, the intro was so epic. And it introduced this character that we didn't know. And I was in love. I love Roxas to this day. Roxas is like one of the best characters.
Yeah. I think my buddy who lent it to me, he knew it was 2 was the way to go to get this guy, right? Because it's Kingdom Hearts 1, as important as it is,
it's rough.
It's not aged incredibly well from a gameplay perspective, right? And from other things.
It's mainly the camera.
Yeah.
The camera's pretty miserable.
So my buddy knew, he's like, if I really want to get this guy hooked, I'm going to just start him where it gets good, right? And you don't have to, he's not in love with Sora. He doesn't know who Sora is, right? And like you said, the first like 3.5 hours, if not 4 or 5, you play as Roxas.
Yeah, you're like skateboarding.
Who's like the coolest dude ever.
Got cool hair.
My buddy really knew where to get me. He's like, I know where to start him to really get him on this train.
Gotta get this guy some Roxas.
Yep. Right? And then eventually I did go back and play the first one, which is necessary, right? So that you can understand everything that's going on and really just experience it. But yeah, Kingdom Hearts 2 is probably the game that I've played from cover to cover the most times, right? At least twice per iteration, right? So like PS2, 3, and 4. I've played it 2 or 3 times each on those platforms. And it was... Funny thing about Kingdom Hearts 2, I just remember this. I remember, you get to the final world, and then there's the where you start the final boss against Xemnas. And it says, are you sure you want to continue, right? And you go, yes. You fight him, you go through an hour and a half of cutscenes, and then it just shows you the final title card, and you can't click out of it. Do you remember that?
I do.
And I was like, what? That
I can't explore anymore.
I can't explore anymore. And I remember calling my buddy, and I was like, what do I do? How do I get back?
He's like, it's over.
He's like, no, it's over. And I'm like, what do you mean it's over? He's like, if you want to keep playing, you have to just restart your PlayStation.
Or hopefully have a save before that boss encounter.
Exactly, right? And luckily I did. Because I think he told me that. He's like, save your game right now. Don't.
Kingdom Hearts 2 was my intro into games that had incredible stories. And to this day, that's still like what I go for when it comes to games. I want to be told like an incredible story. And it's video games, like you mentioned, outsell every other platform of media and entertainment. And I think it has a lot to do with, because you have like a 20+ hour time frame, you can tell incredible stories.
Yeah. And the PlayStation 2 alone, like, I want to definitely give it its praise.
Yeah.
The PlayStation 2 alone, again, it had games like Shadow of the Colossus. It had Grand Theft Auto, Devil May Cry. It had so many iconic games with iconic stories, right? For me personally, so being a big Final Fantasy fan, and this is the case for most people, Final Fantasy X was huge. And Final Fantasy X was huge. It was like just the story of Tidus and Xanarkand, and like it was so epic, and it was a really good introduction to even people like people that weren't super into Final Fantasy. I was already into Final Fantasy, but it was so accessible that I just loved the story. It was so great. But what made Kingdom Hearts easy for me to get into, and we won't spend too much time on Kingdom Hearts.
Sure.
But the Kingdom Hearts 1 started with Final Fantasy X characters. You had Waka, you had Tidus, right? It was awesome.
Yeah. Is Leon from number 10?
No.
Oh, dang it.
No.
Leon's one of the coolest.
But Yeah, like seeing like when you're on the island itself, and it's like Waka's, everyone's there. It's just perfect. It's perfect. So, and what's funny is that Riku in Kingdom Hearts, there's actually a female character in Final Fantasy X named Riku.
Oh,
So I was
okay.
confused when I was playing. I was like, so there's Final Fantasy X characters, but there's a new character exclusive to Kingdom Hearts named Riku.
Yeah.
I'm like, but there was a Riku in Final Fantasy
That's funny
X.
that you say that, because when my buddy says the main character's name is Sora and I was like, wait, he? Because I knew Sora from Digimon, and it was one of the girls. In
He
the group of
totally looks like a Digimon character too.
yeah. But I was like, Sora's a girl's name because of Digimon. He can't be called Sora. You know what I mean?
He's a boy.
yeah.
Yeah, so I really like that, getting into the topic of story-based gaming right now. While I do get what you're saying, nowadays, the online craze is obviously running rampant, right?
Totally.
We do have, people are craving those story-based games. Like we recently saw Hogwarts Legacy come out. The God of War games are soaring. It's great. However, it's like, it's such a treat, because while I know that Call of Duty is going to have a campaign, or Battlefield nowadays, I mean, the last one didn't have one, but they're going to be introducing a campaign. Games like that, that's a second thought. That's an afterthought.
Yeah.
The online component is its, first and foremost priority. And that's great for a lot of people. There are people that are into competitive gaming.
Yeah.
There's like Fortnite, Rocket League, whatever. That's not me. I personally I love stories. I love coming home after a long day. I love isolating myself and getting involved in a world, and I don't like my gaming to be social. And I know that's different for a lot of people, but I love being a part of stories, storytelling. I love the immersion.
Yeah.
Right? So let's start after the PS2.
Okay.
PS3, PS4, and you and I we're obviously Sony boys, right?
Yeah.
What are some games after the PS2, when we're getting into the PS3 and on? What are some games that really spoke to you, that you love, that you're a fan of? Maybe like they've earned your lifelong allegiance.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, we got the PlayStation 3 late. We did have a Game Informer magazine subscription, right? And so we got these articles about these huge games that were coming out, and then we didn't get to play them. So we got a PlayStation 3, and I think me and my brother went out and bought the Batman Arkham game, Arkham Asylum. I don't remember if Arkham City was out yet. I think it was. I think we bought both of them. So the Arkham games, PlayStation 3. We got Infamous. I remember reading the article on Infamous several times in the Game Informer because it seemed so cool to me.
And it was cool.
Yeah, it was a superhero game that wasn't tied to any like comic or anything. It was like a brand new superhero. And it was the coolest game ever. And then Uncharted. So those three franchises really kicked off the PlayStation 3 experience. And like I said, the storytelling experience. Because obviously people look back on the Arkham games and they remember how Rocksteady was able to capture the Batman experience in its gameplay. But those stories are really cool. Like they tell really good stories, especially Arkham City. Like what a cool story that's not tied to any comic, like any existing comic. They made up their own story for this game. It's so cool.
Well, yeah, and you have like the best iteration of the Joker, arguably since like the animated series, right?
Yep. Yeah.
It's awesome stuff. And while the PlayStation 2, I'm not going back too far, brought me some of my favorite horror games of all time, namely Silent Hill 2. I'm a huge Silent Hill fanatic. PlayStation 3 had The Last of Us.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. The Last of Us.
So don't hate me, everybody. I actually played The Last of Us for the first time just recently. And it was an experience.
What was it like?
Well, so the Last of Us TV series that just came out is obviously like a phenomenon that like everybody is into. I had bought, right? We had a PlayStation 3 for a long time. We finally got a PS4. I got the remastered version. I sat down, I played the first couple of hours, and I was like, this is too intense for me. And I put it away.
Like the
for years.
gameplay or
It was just like, I don't know. It was like And I think this is one of the reasons that Joel and the characters in The Last of Us are so compelling. They're not the most heroic, right? I had played Nathan Drake in Uncharted. I had played Batman in Arkham. I was like, these are the heroes. And I think even though I couldn't subconsciously recognize that, I was like, I like Joel, but I'm having a hard time rooting for him. And he's not like this compelling hero that I want to be projecting myself onto when I play video games, right? So I played the first couple of missions and hours and I put it away. And I think I didn't have like any experience with horror gaming, air quotations. So being tensed by the zombies getting out at me every couple of seconds was
wasn't
like,
a good
it was a
feeling.
little too intense for me. So I put it away for a long time. And only recently did I pull it back out and finally play it all the way through. And what a story, dude. What a story. And anybody who's played it or who's seen the show, you know, what a story, man. It's crazy.
It's so good. And the second one's really good too. I'm trying to push you to play that one as well.
Once I put down the part 1, I was like, okay, let me go play something that's really silly for a little while, and then I'll go back and play the other one, because it's a pretty intense story that really shines a light on like human, which is crazy. Like if you ask my dad, right, who's non-video game, never has been, never will be, if I told you, hey, one of the most compelling and human stories ever told is played through a video game, he'd be like, you're nuts. That's not true. Right. And I think when video games first came out, just based on the limited technology, nobody ever anticipated that they would tell these human emotional stories. Right. And now we're at the point where these intense stories about human emotion and sacrifice and relationships and anguish and pain are being told through the medium of press X to do this. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. I love that there are still games coming out that are really pushing the narrative side of gaming. Obviously, Last of Us was a big deal on the PS3. But yeah, I mean, it's still going strong today. We have, like I said before, the new God of War games. Man, we are eating so good. My favorite franchise is getting amazing remakes. The Resident Evil 2 remake came out, and I can't think. I mean, it was 2018 that came out, so 20 years after the original. And I can't think of a time when I was more happy than the day I got my Resident Evil 2 remake copy. And then the next year, Resident Evil 3 remake came out, and I'm one of the few that actually love that game. And then it's like
the number 3 remake got some backlash.
100%.
Bummer.
Just because they cut some content, and I felt it helped with the pacing. But I totally get where people are coming from. And then we got Village. And then Resident Evil 4 remake just came out fairly recently. And I don't like Resident Evil 4.
Which is like the biggest hot take ever.
It is. And I've gotten so much crap for not being a fan of Resident Evil 4. The remake won me over. It totally did.
Dang.
But we're eating good.
Yeah.
Right? We have so many great games. And even though the online community is going strong, the PvP side of gaming, we're still getting great storylines through video games. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing. It's such a great hobby. It's a great way to spend your time. Over the past few decades, we've had congressmen and all these people come out that talk about how harmful video games are. And science actually shows the opposite. Okay. People that are, people that go on to commit violent acts, that's probably where they were going anyway. Now, a video game or a movie or a TV show or a band or whatever can speak to certain people that are a little fragile in the mind.
Yeah.
But on average, it helps with your coordination. It helps with your attention span. There are so many great things. And, we live in a different world today, and it's not a world that I necessarily always agree with. But at the end of the day, it's helping some people be social that weren't able to be social.
Yeah, we live in such an interesting time where people can connect over vast space, right? And you've mentioned this before in previous episodes. These little things like Seinfeld connect me and you that shouldn't on paper be buddies, right? That have so much difference, right? So the fact that somebody can have an emotional reaction to a video game and then be able to reach out and like link up with people like that, it's a cool thing, right? It probably shouldn't be your only form of human connection, but it is a cool thing that that's available.
1000% agree. And there's, I mean, there's just like so many cases of people that have health issues that can't really go out and meet people, or there's just, the ideal situation is that we go out into the world. Like when you were a kid, you went out in the backyard, you played field tennis or whatever, but then you also had dedicated time to lose yourself in a storyline. That right there is the healthy balance we should all strive for, right? The problem is that some people can't always do that. So video games are great for a lot of people. They're wonderful pieces of art. It takes every art form imaginable and it turns it into this big colossus of a thing. And I love that about it. And I still love retro gaming. I still love, speed running Donkey Kong Country. I still love speed running Super Mario World. I love 100%ing those games. I love going back to the NES and playing Super Mario Brothers 3 and Super Mario Brothers 2 and Metal Storm and Legend of Zelda 1 and 2 and freaking Metroid and Castlevania 1 through 3. And it's just like, I love these games so much, right? And I don't know, it's special. It's such a special thing. It means a lot to me. Sounds like it's meant a lot to you too.
Yeah, it's definitely, and we talked about this in the first episode, right? Like I've led this life up until this point that has been a little bit more focused on making sure I'm productive, right? Like I have a wife, I have a family that I need to take care of. There was a span definitely in the middle of my early 20s where I was focused on how do I make money, right? How do I provide for my family? How do I be a functioning member of society, right? And that was like my groundwork. And now that I have a job that pays for everything that I need, I have more time to pursue creative endeavors, right? And I cannot talk about my creative endeavors and the things that inspire me creatively without talking about video games, right? Especially when it comes to, the fact that I want to be a writer and I want to build characters and I want to write cool stories. I can't ignore those examples of incredible story building, incredible character building. I need to have those outlets for exploring story as well. And so it's been not only just a good way to zone out at the end of the day, but also I've learned a lot storytelling wise, which is my favorite. Totally my favorite.
Love that. Now, with a podcast episode about video games, obviously it's difficult to structure this because there are two ways this can go. Number one, it can go down a reminiscing path, which is kind of the route that we took. And maybe I inject some stupid historical stuff here and there, or it goes into an educational piece, right? Now, with this being a podcast and us talking, we gush over the things we love.
Yeah.
And while we can't get to every game that we love, I want to close out with two topics because we're getting to the end here. Number one, I want to know, out of literally every franchise in history, I want to know what your top are. It's hard to give a number just because I might say 5 and you might only come up with 4, or I might say 4 and you come up with 7, right? So
Sure.
What are our top video games? And then we're going to close out with, where do we think video games are heading? Okay. So I'll start.
Okay.
Mine are simple. And I don't have to put this in any particular order, but Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Castlevania, Metroid, and I'm probably going to close out with... Dang, I'll give 2 more.
Okay.
This isn't a franchise. This would be my favorite video game. One of my favorite video games, Donkey Kong Country for Super NES. And then lastly, I'm going to throw Kingdom Hearts 2 in there. So 2 of those are title specific.
Yeah.
The other ones are franchise specific because, again, I think Silent Hill 1 through 3 are brilliant. I think Resident Evil has been going strong for a long time. I have a complete US Resident Evil collection. I have a complete US Silent Hill collection. I have almost a complete Japanese Resident Evil and Silent Hill collection. I have a complete Castlevania collection. I'm a dork when it comes to this stuff. So once again, to reiterate, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Castlevania, Metroid, Donkey Kong Country title specific, and the last title specific, I'm going to say Kingdom Hearts 2. So what do you think?
Man. Well, obviously Kingdom Hearts 2, that's a title specific one. That one's also on mine, right? Franchises, the Uncharted games. I think that those
They're all good.
They're all really, all four of them are really good. And I should say even the fifth one, there's the Lost Legacy where you play as Chloe. That game is also really incredible. Really like a cinematic game, you know? It's really cool. The Batman Arkham games, and I'm one of the few people that really likes Arkham Origins, right? I know a lot of people don't even...
I think you're the only person I've met that likes it.
A lot of people don't even include that in the franchise. They're like,
it wasn't included in the collection.
Yeah.
So
but
Return to Arkham collection.
I think that Arkham Origins is really cool. I think that it tells a very interesting story about a young Batman, and not only a young Batman, but like his first run-in with the Joker is really cool. It also has like a couple of the best boss fights, I think, in the series, which might be a hot take. So Uncharted, Kingdom Hearts 2, Batman, Arkham, God of War.
The newer God of War.
The newer God of War. And I think as a franchise, it's one of the best. And don't hate me, everybody. I actually haven't played the original ones where he's in Greece.
So you haven't played 1, 2, or 3? Or any of the side games like Ascension, Chains of Olympus?
I've only played God of War 2016 and Ragnarok.
Okay.
And those are good enough for it to go in my top, right? I've had some really special experiences playing that game, which is so funny for a game that's, you know, built on its brutal gameplay. It's like a brutal game, but I've still had like really important experiences with it. It's hard for me to go into more franchises without just like kind of narrowing out certain games within it.
See, and this is the true contrast between a casual like gamer and like someone like me that's like my whole life was not my whole life, but a big part of my life is surrounded by it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you just love video games. Like you just like pick them up and play and appreciate them, right?
Totally.
You don't obsess. You don't have these in your life.
I really don't.
No,
I really don't. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast for sure.
Would you say that The Last of Us falls into some of your favorites?
It's definitely like a really incredible one. I think there are others that edge it out based on my sensibilities as like a, you know, like I said,
there's one you didn't mention, by the way. I know one of your favorite games of all time
that I haven't mentioned,
or at least that you didn't mention in this list.
I know that Spider-Man 2 has
That's what I was going to say.
Spider-Man 2 has like a really important nostalgia aspect to it, but the new Spider-Man PS4 and the Miles Morales games are
destroy it.
It's the ultimate Spider-Man experience. So those are really good. And like I said with Batman, tell a unique Spider-Man story that hasn't been told in the comics before. Like that's really cool that they can do that, you know? Yeah, Spider-Man 2 holds a very nostalgic place in my heart. If I'm thinking of franchises, it's hard for me to say which ones are my favorite. I'm just going to tell you which ones are popping into my head right now.
Hit it. Let's go.
Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank.
Oh, Ratchet and Clank and Sly Cooper. Such good games.
Love those ones, right?
The newer Ratchet and Clank games are also incredible.
So good. So
Rift
good.
Apart was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. Sly Cooper almost has an opposite of Kingdom Hearts, right? I played the second one first in Kingdom Hearts and then had a hard time with the first one. So the same thing with Sly Cooper. I played the second and third ones first and then went back. And I actually think the first one like stands better than the other two.
Well, isn't the first Sly Cooper compared to the second one a little more linear? It's not as open. It's
also very much more like a platform centric game.
Yeah.
You know, and as someone who didn't really grow up on platforms, you know, it's like really cool that I like that one so much. You know what I mean? But yeah, those are a couple of franchises that stick out. Huge Rock Band fan. That was like the first, you mentioned social games. That was the game where I invited all my buddies over and we'd stay up all night playing Rock Band, right? Trying to unlock all the songs and stuff. Still to this day, I love it. Love the guitar, love the drums, love everything about it.
Love to shred.
Oh yeah. But you're right. It's like a super huge contrast, right? Like I can pick out specific games and like a couple of franchises that mean a lot to me, but you're right. I just don't have the same kind of dedication to it, which is okay. We've said this in episodes before. whatever level you have on the things that you like,
That's cool.
Just have fun with it.
It's
you know?
super cool. And
Yeah.
no, and I mean, we could have easily picked a topic like basketball.
Yeah.
And you are going to have a way more like miles and miles way more stake in that than I ever could.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense. Like, I don't know. And to be clear, there are just so many games that you cannot mention in a podcast, right?
Mhm.
I mean, even newer games like Ghost of Tsushima. I'm a huge
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I'm a huge Death Stranding fan. Like I love all that stuff. We didn't talk much about Metal Gear Solid. Like there's just a million.
There's a bunch.
There's so many games that you can't.
I know
get
if
to.
I went home and pulled out a drawer that has my games
You're gonna
stacked
kick
in
yourself.
it, I'll be like, how did I forget that one?
Yeah.
Ghost of Tsushima is one of them. What of amongst like some of the like newer games that have come out in the past few years? Holy moly, that one's up there. That one's crazy.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. And again, we're also in the era of remakes, which some people are on the fence about. I'm pro remake. I will say that. I've gotten some of my favorite games of the year this year. I got, we kicked it off with Dead Space remake, which I've probably beaten Dead Space remake like maybe 4 or 5 times now. The Resident Evil 4 remake came out. I've probably played through that game like 8 or 9 times now. And I know that sounds obsessive, but you have to understand, like, you can beat a Resident Evil game in like an hour or two most times. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is a little bit longer, but these games are meant to be ran numerous times. So
We also didn't talk about Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which I think for both of us has like a little bit of a spot.
It does. No,
Yeah.
it absolutely does. Those like those Activision O2 titles back in the day, and also like again Neversoft, right? Like I think Tony Hawk,
Which also got an incredible remake recently too.
it did 1 and 2 were great,
Yep.
and yeah, going from Tony Hawk 1, I mean Tony Hawk 2 is where it really got good, but Tony Hawk 1 all the way up to, in my opinion, American Wasteland. I love American Wasteland also. Tony, if I lived in a world where Tony Hawk's Underground could get a remake, I would crap my pants.
That might be one of my favorites. I would play that in a second.
Yeah, like that. It'll never happen. Like I'm not trying to.
Probably not.
I'm not trying to put it out in the world and like, slap down manifesting of stuff. But like realistically, that's never gonna happen. We're probably not even gonna get a 3 and 4 remake because 1 and 2 are like the iconic ones in people's minds. But Tony Hawk is the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But to close this out, I love that there's a contrast between you and I. I love that, like, as someone that, it goes back to the filmmaking thing, okay? As someone that's so involved in a world, when I meet someone that comes into a world that I exist in all the time and isn't sour or elitist and they just show their love and appreciation for things, it's the greatest. It's like when you make a film. It's like when I'm making a film and you come on set and you're like, this is the coolest thing. I'm having so much fun. I can't wait to do this again. Can we keep going today? Can we get more shots? Ooh, what about this and this? It's exciting because it sort of revitalizes your love of something.
Definitely.
As someone who exists in the world of video games, and let's be clear, I'm not like a guy that spends 10 hours a day gaming. Realistically, nowadays, I probably spend 3 or 4 hours a week gaming. So I'm so busy. But someone that exists in this world, and I meet a lot of gatekeepers and people like that. I love meeting people like you that come in with just the freshest enthusiasm about something. And it's like you can sit down like we are right now.
Yeah.
And in a very non-structured format and just gush for a little bit about something that we love. Closing question for you.
Okay. Well, hold on.
Yes.
If I can say something.
Let's go.
On the flip side, it's and anybody who falls in my category in this like arena where you don't know as much about something, it's like cool to link up with somebody who knows way more about it than you, and you can just kind of soak it in, right? Like you know way more about the D-pad than anybody ever might know singularly, right? And you've taught me about stuff as seemingly inconsequential to me as the D-pad, right? And so it's if you are the person who falls on my side of the table where you may not know as much, just sit around and soak it in because it's fun to learn a bunch of stuff. So I appreciate you being able to teach me a bunch of stuff.
It's history like anything else, right? Some people don't put a lot of stake into video games. They think they're a waste of time or whatever. I believe in balance, you know, balance with everything. I think anything can consume your life, but I think if you have a healthy balance, video games are very beneficial to you. And not everything, you know, sorry, not to backtrack too much, but you were saying earlier you like to be productive, right? There are times when you and I are texting and you'll text me, you're like, oh, I'm thinking about skipping the gym today. And I'm like, dude, maybe you need a rest.
Yeah.
Not everything in life needs to be go, go, go.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay to stop and just
Totally.
enjoy something for no reason, right?
Yeah, totally.
So slowing down is okay. I think video games are great. And I love that you have that balance and that I've learned to strike a balance between my hobbies in life. And I want to know, let's close this out.
Okay.
Where do you think video games are heading? What kind of world are we getting into with video games, and what do you think as a casual fan? Where, you know, I have a better question for you.
Okay.
Because you fall more on the side of hobbyist. Where would you like video games to go?
I think I kind of just want them to keep going in the same direction, you know? Just keep giving, especially, and we'll talk about this in another episode, in Hollywood and in other, you've mentioned remakes in gaming, right? And that has its place, but it sure seems like we're getting in Hollywood and like, especially in movies, we're getting like really, really, really bogged down with remake-itis and sequel-itis and extended universe-itis. Everything has to be connected to something that we've already seen, right? And which is why when you sit down and you watch a movie that's so original that you've never seen before, it's incredibly refreshing, right? And I hope that we just keep getting video games that are original ideas, right? And I think we will. We have a lot of remakes coming out, but the thing that like sets remakes apart in a lot of cases from like Hollywood remakes is that there's new technology to take advantage of, right? And we get a remake that where the camera is fixed or the direction is more like finely tuned or the button scheme is a little bit better and the graphics are better, right? So we have a lot of that going on, but I just want to see increasingly more original content, right? Give me somebody who's never written anything before, or at least has never produced, like had their work published, and let me hear what their original story is, right? Let me get another superhero game that's never been done before about a superhero that's never been made before, right? Give me an espionage game about a spy that's not Mission Impossible or James Bond. Give me another mythology game, right? Like God of War, where the dude actually isn't part of the mythology. Just keep giving me original stuff and stories that are refreshing, right? Because seeing new things is so exciting. It's so exciting. And I don't think that we're going to go into that path where video games start becoming, you know, sequelitis or remake-itis. I think we're going to keep getting those original ideas, and I just want to see more of that. That's what I hope for.
Yeah, that's a really, really good perspective. Having technology advance, I think it benefits video games more than movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, we're getting a Vertigo remake.
Yeah.
With, I believe it's Robert Downey Jr.
Yep.
You could ask what has progressed between Alfred Hitchcock's original and now, and really what it comes down to is like CG.
Yeah.
You have CG. Now, we do have digital cameras, we have better equipment or whatever, but really, Vertigo does not need CGI.
And the real reason the Vertigo movie is being made is for dollars, right? It's because you don't have to advertise a Vertigo movie as much. Everybody already kind of knows what it is. And then you'll get Robert Downey Jr., who's one of the most bankable actors there is right now, and the theater fills itself. You know what I mean? It's about dollars, and I don't want to like stomp on that. It's okay, you know. But
it's a business.
But that's not the case in video games, I don't feel like.
They're right. Like, there definitely are big publishers that are doing the greedy thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked a little bit about Call of Duty, and, you know, EA is a big, I'm not speaking any new news here, but Madden has been the same since like 2013. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going on we're going on 10 years of Madden not changing. In fact, removing, features and then putting them back in as new features.
Yeah.
And it's like
behind a paywall with DLC and stuff.
Football fans deserve so much better than that. It's like, vote with your wallet, right? I want new ideas too. In terms of remakes, I really like the fact that I got a Resident Evil 2 remake 20 years after the original, because I get to see this beautiful locale and this beautiful story told in like a new way.
In HD.
It's perfect.
Yeah, it's cool.
Right? But yeah, I do agree with that. I do want some new concepts. And we're definitely going that route, I think. I think people, if they're not sick of something now, they will, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we're getting to that point where people are fed up with crap. Battlefield, for example, 2042, the last Battlefield that came out, people were like, no, we're not having this. Give us a story. Give us a quality game. We're not buying this crap.
Yeah.
It was like Fallout 76. We're not buying this crap. It's like Cyberpunk. We're not buying this crap. It's like EA's Anthem with BioWare. We're not buying this crap. People are finally starting to stand up for original concepts, great ideas,
well, when it costs
good execution.
When it costs you $70 to get the disc, you have to be a little bit more smart. You know what I mean? Like, we thought that $50 was crazy for a game. I mean, me and my brother hoarded together money for months so that we could get Smash Brothers on GameCube. And nowadays it's like, dude, it's $70 for like the newest title. Like, you have to be a little bit more conscious about what you're like picking up, And if you don't like what a studio is doing, you don't have to pick it up,
So I agree with you. I want things to keep going the way they're going because A, we're getting great games, and B, people are wising up to the crap that's happening. And again, money is good. I want people to make money. I love capitalism. I love all of these things.
Yeah.
But just give us good stuff. Keep it coming.
Yeah.
That's why
it's the fact that like Sucker Punch, right, can make Sly Cooper, right? And then at a certain point they're like, we want to make something different. They make Infamous, right? And then like, we want to make something different. Even when people are like, we want another. I was on the team that was like, give me another Infamous. I love Infamous.
Yeah, I mean, the last one we got was Second Son.
Which is like a launch title for PS4.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Then they turn around and they're like, now we're going to make Ghost of Tsushima. And I'm like, thank goodness you did that and didn't make another Infamous game.
It would have made me sad. I mean, I wouldn't have known, but if Ghost of Tsushima disappeared today, I'd be very sad.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a studio that is telling the story that needs to be told and then writing a new one. And it's so cool.
And telling the stories they want to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome.
And it's the same thing with Naughty Dog.
Yep.
We go from Uncharted to Last of Us. They're telling the stories they want to tell.
Yep.
And artists out there, video game devs, publishers, whoever's listening, probably none of them. Just keep it coming.
Or all of them.
Or all of them. Just keep it coming.
Yep.
Keep it coming.
Keep doing what you're doing.
But yeah, again, not a very structured episode. You and I just having fun and gushing. Mm-hmm. And I'm cool with that.
I am too.
I'm cool with that. We've come off of three very, I don't know, three topics that were a little more kind of arrowed. And it's nice to have just a goofy episode in the middle here. So this is episode 4, video games. And yeah, I'm having such a good time doing this podcast.
Good, I'm glad.
We are officially 1/3 of the way through.
Look at that.
Holy moly.
Not bad.
Not bad at all, partner. So we are 1/3 of the way through. Can't wait to show you guys what's coming up next week. But yeah, do you have any closing thoughts?
Nope. Thanks for, as always, like the stuff that you like and just have fun with it. That stuff is in your life to add a little bit of breakup, and you're supposed to have fun.
I think he's still feeling guilty about the Big Bang Theory.
No. Could be.
Yeah. But if you want to like anything, like this podcast, subscribe. Again, weekly. This thing's going to be coming out for 3 months. And again, we'll cross the bridge of doing more later. So.
I wonder if hopefully it's not too early to say this. Every single podcast and every single YouTube series says this, but if you have any topics that you are strongly that you really like, throw them in a comment or whatever. And maybe at some point, it might be too early to do this, but you know what I mean? Like, give us your hot takes, give us what you think would be fun to talk about. And maybe at some point we'll be able to talk about it too.
Absolutely. You could, again, follow us on Instagram. Mine is at Dylan Hamar. His is at AJetzel.
Yep. AJETSEL.
Right. And I'm DYLANHAMAR. Send us a message. Let us know what you want to hear. And you know what? If you disagree with something we said and you're like, hey guys, I don't agree with that, I want to hear that just the same. So how can we get better? What are some topics you'd want to hear? And ultimately, I don't know, just anything you're thinking. I think that's, even though we're only in episode 4, Alek, I think that's totally fair.
Cool.
To say. So we really appreciate you listening. This is a lot of fun. We're having a blast doing it, and we're getting to talk about some of our favorite topics. And oh my gosh, do we have bangers of episodes coming up?
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
So yeah. All right, guys, take care. Thank you for listening to episode 4 of
The Very Refreshing Podcast.
It's refreshing. It's very refreshing.
See you guys.
Thank you for checking out the Very Refreshing Podcast. Subscribe for more content just like this.